You ever come home, walk through your front door, and just feel like the air inside is heavier than outside? Like you're dragging something invisible across the living room. Not furniture, not mess, just this strange weight. And no matter how much you clean or open the windows, it keeps showing up. That's how it started for me. I thought maybe I was just tired. Or maybe the weather was messing with me. Then one afternoon, I sat down on the couch, and it hit me. The house didn't feel like it was letting anything go. No air, no ease. Like everything was just sitting, waiting. That moment stuck with me. Because it wasn't about oxygen. It was about energy. About how things felt, tight money, mood, even time. If you've ever felt like something small was slowing everything down, like the house itself was pressing pause on your life, you're not alone. Turns out, there's a Feng Shui mistake that hides in the way air moves through your home. And when the air's blocked, your luck, your cash flow, your whole energy gets blocked right along with it. If any part of this sounds like what you've been feeling, I'm glad you're here. This channel isn't about fixing everything overnight. It's about seeing things we've ignored for too long. So, if that feels right to you, feel free to hit like, subscribe, or leave a comment so the algorithm knows. You're part of this small shift. Now, let's look at what's floating around in your air and what it might be holding back. Energy doesn't need noise to get stuck. Sometimes, it just needs a closed vent, a forgotten filter, or a hallway where the air no longer moves. There was a strange heaviness inside the house. Not the kind that comes from clutter, or chaos, or noise, but a quiet, weight-settled, soft, and hard to notice. It crept in slowly, like dust you don't see until the sunlight hits it just right. Mark had been living like this for months. Windows mostly shut. A couple of vents sealed to save on energy. Guest room door always closed. He thought he was being efficient keeping cool air where he needed it. But the air inside the house felt stale. Nothing terrible, just off. And no matter how much he vacuumed or wiped things down, the feeling didn't go away. He wasn't sure when it started. Maybe it had always been that way. But lately, it had begun to follow him around. Into his sleep, into his work, into his thoughts. He'd sit down to plan the week, and his mind would fog. He'd go over invoices and budgets, and feel strangely tired, even when he hadn't done much. There was a weird kind of pause in everything. A stillness that wasn't peaceful. Just slow. Slower than life should be. And somewhere in that slow wait, his money flow had started to mirror the air around him. Quiet, delayed, disconnected. In Feng Shui, air isn't just a physical thing. It's the carrier of chai, living, moving breath of energy. The way air flows through a space tells the story of how life flows through it. When air is stuck, qi is stuck. And when qi is stuck, you'll start noticing it in your mood, your ideas, your luck, your bank account. What Mark didn't realize was that his house wasn't breathing. It was sealed in all the wrong places. Air couldn't circulate. And energy couldn't complete its path. So the corners of his home, especially the ones that mattered for money and decision-making, had grown energetically heavy. The air just felt tired, like it had been sitting there for days, not going anywhere. In Feng Shui terms, Mark's wealth energy wasn't leaving. It was simply not moving. And anything that stops moving too long eventually begins to fade. A house with blocked airflow doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It slowly dampens ambition. It slows how quickly good things find you. And it turns lucky breaks into long waits. Mark had always been practical. Raised in a small Arizona town, air conditioning was king, and airflow was just a technical detail. He worked hard, paid his bills, and didn't believe in energy stuff. But that year, things started compounding. Small delays became habits. Clients stopped replying as fast. His side projects lost momentum. His motivation to even try? That began to slip too. It wasn't depression. It wasn't burnout. It was more like disconnection. From movement. From flow. From the part of life that used to feel responsive. And in the middle of all that, his finances began to quietly stall. When energy slows down in your home, money doesn't disappear, it just starts waiting. And sometimes it waits too long. Think of a hallway that no one walks down anymore. It gets quiet. Dust collects. Light doesn't land the same. And even though it's still part of the house, it starts feeling forgotten. That's what airflow does when it's blocked. It turns living spaces into energetic dead zones. Places where intention disappears. Where thoughts hang like shirts on a rack and worn unchosen. Mark didn't realize he had created pockets of energetic silence. By blocking the movement of air. It wasn't about design. It was about how the house had stopped engaging with itself. And when the house stops engaging, so do you. Studies in environmental psychology show that poor airflow in homes contributes to higher CO2 levels, low mood, mental fatigue, and even mild confusion. Spaces with poor ventilation lead to stagnant air, which affects how clearly people think and how motivated they feel to act. In Feng Shui, this is known as qi collapse, where the energy doesn't fight back. It simply folds in on itself and takes your money, your focus, and your momentum with it. Mark didn't do a full home renovation. He didn't burn sage or call a master. He started with air. He opened all the ventias, even the ones in rooms he rarely entered. He checked the filters, replaced them, cleared behind furniture. Let cross-ventilation do its thing for the first time in years. He didn't expect anything. But within days, he noticed small things. He felt more awake by noon. A payment that had been pending suddenly processed. He had the mental clarity to finally call back 2 clients he'd avoided. He laughed more. His space started feeling like his again. The air felt alive, like something had opened up not just in the house, but in him. It wasn't the wind that changed. It was the energy path finally being restored. Mark now jokes with friends that he didn't need a life coach. He just needed to stop choking his AC vents. And every time someone tells him they feel off in their space, he just nods and says, "Check your airflow first. Your house might be holding its breath." Turns out, I wasn't lazy. I was living in air soup. The way air moves in your home is the way wealth moves in your life. If one gets blocked, so will the other. In Feng Shui, energy doesn't just enter, it has to return. Without return flow, wealth comes in, but it doesn't know where to stay. After opening all the vents and letting air move again, Mark felt things begin to shift. The house felt lighter, the tension in the walls gone. But the changes didn't last long. By the second week, something strange crept back in. He started waking up feeling foggy again. There was a strange tightness in the hallway between the living room and kitchen. Almost like the air got stuck there. He kept telling himself maybe it was the weather. But deep down, he knew something wasn't complete. And that's when it hit him. It wasn't just about air going out. It was about air coming back. Movement was happening, but it had no place to return. No loop, no rhythm. The flow had started, but it was still broken. It felt like energy was trying to help, but getting lost halfway through. In Feng Shui, qi must circulate. Just like the body, it needs an inhalation and an exhalation. Not just flow, but return flow. Without that loop, everything becomes one-directional. It drains. It scatters. It doesn't know where to settle. Mark had opened his vents, yes. But the return air path, the hallway return vent, had been blocked for years. A shelf full of books stood in front of it. And below that, a storage bin tucked in perfectly, sealing it off. He'd forgotten it was even there. It wasn't loud. It didn't complain. It just quietly stopped doing its job. And when air can't return, neither can clarity. Neither can momentum. Neither can money that's meant to stay. Money doesn't just arrive. It needs space to land and rhythm to stay. Mark began to notice something subtle but real. His confidence dipped not because of failure, but because everything felt halfway. He'd start a project and stop. He'd get a payment, but it disappeared into bills. He'd feel good one morning and crash by 2 p.m. It was like nothing could finish its cycle. He wasn't drained, he was unanchored. There was motion but no return. Success without stability. And that kind of pattern doesn't feel chaotic. It feels empty, quietly, hollowly empty, like spinning in place. He started asking himself, why does everything feel incomplete? Imagine a bathtub with no drain. You can fill it. The water looks fine. But if it doesn't circulate, it gets murky fast. Hair collects, soap scum lingers. Even clean water turns stale. The return path, just like a drain, is what keeps energy fresh. Mark had opened up the vents, but he'd unknowingly sealed the energetic drain of his home. And with no way for energy to loop back, the house started to feel bloated. Not full in a comforting way, but overfilled with nowhere to release. Mood shift kit. It felt like the house was holding its breath again, only this time, slower and harder to notice. HVAC experts explain that return vents aren't optional, they're essential. They pull used air back into the system, balance pressure, and regulate how effectively fresh air circulates. When they're blocked, air becomes imbalanced, leading to uneven temperatures, low oxygen in pockets, and eventual system strain. Feng Shui sees this as incomplete energy movement, an energetic backlog. Instead of qi moving in a full circle, it spirals into loss. And with it, so can your money, your health focus, and your ability to make timely decisions. Mark moved the shelf, unboxed the bin, cleaned the return vent he hadn't touched in 6 years. He didn't think it would matter, but the shift was almost immediate. The air flowed differently. It had direction. Rooms felt equal. He walked through the hallway, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel clogged. The next day, he checked his business account. A client who hadn't paid in 2 months had just wired the balance. And with that came a quiet relief. Not joy, not triumph, just the kind of deep reset that told him something had come full circle. It felt like the house had finally stopped spinning and found its rhythm again. Mark now keeps that return vent uncovered no matter what. And anytime someone mentions weird money blocks or brain fog, he just smiles and says, "You might not need another planner. You might just need to let your air come home." Turns out my lucky flow didn't need motivation. It needed a return vent. Feng Shui isn't just about where things go. It's about where they return. Because wealth doesn't just enter. It stays where it feels free to breathe. If this part of the story hit close, if you've ever felt your home had motion, but not direction, thank you for still watching. That tells me you're not here for quick fixes. You're here because some part of you knows there's more to this. So if you'd like to keep exploring how small shifts can bring back energy, bring back clarity, bring back flow, go ahead and like, subscribe, or share something in the comments. It helps this message reach more homes that are quietly asking for Chang. The ceiling fan was meant to help the room feel lighter. But in Feng Shui, when it spins the wrong way, it doesn't cool energy, it shreds it. After adjusting airflow and clearing the return path, Mark felt something shifting deeper. The house no longer felt tight, but it didn't feel totally balanced either. There was this strange, swirling energy in the bedroom, almost too active, restless even. Not chaotic, but not calm. He wasn't sleeping well. His mind kept spinning with unfinished thoughts. And every morning felt like waking up mid-conversation. Not refreshed, not restored. That's when he noticed the ceiling fan. It had been running non-stop day and night. Summer in Arizona made it necessary. Or so he thought. But what he didn't realize was that the spin direction was wrong. Instead of calming the room, it was disrupting the flow, pulling qi downward when it should have been lifting it up gently. There was movement, sure, but it was unsettled movement. The kind that looks helpful but throws everything off just enough to slow your mind, your sleep, and your energy's ability to land. Feng Shui teaches that ceiling fans carry more than air. They carry intentional energy. When spinning in the wrong direction, especially counter to seasonal qi, they begin to chop the flow into fragments. Air spins, energy fragments, and the space begins to lose harmony. Mark's fan had been set to the wrong direction for years. Instead of circulating air softly, it created a downward push that felt like tension pressing into the room. And tension, even if silent, has consequences. It felt like the fan was doing too much, like it wasn't cooling, it was stirring something up. The energy in the bedroom couldn't land. Ideas didn't settle. Dreams didn't stick. Cash didn't flow. Because the room was spinning energy out, not welcoming it in. Mark had always thought sleep was about hours, not energy. But even with 8 hours in bed, he woke up feeling like he hadn't stopped working. His thoughts would rush in the moment his head hit the pillow. He wasn't anxious. He just couldn't find stillness. The room buzzed. And deeper than tiredness was a strange frustration. Like he was being kept from something. From peace. From clarity. From finishing what he started. Even his cash flow reflected this. Money came in, but never settled. Invoices cleared, but somehow didn't stay long enough in the account to bring relief. When energy spins too fast, money gets dizzy, and dizzy money doesn't stay. Think of a blender running with no lid. Everything moves, but nothing stays inside. It all splashes, spins, and becomes chaos. That was what the fan had done to his qi. Instead of helping energy circulate gently, it had turned the room into a tornado of scattered movement. No wonder he felt exhausted. He'd been sleeping inside an energetic blender. And when your mind, breath, and money are all spinning at once, nothing lands right. Nothing grows roots. Nothing feels safe to stay. Ceiling fans affect not just temperature, but human nervous system states. When airflow patterns are too fast or directed downward for extended periods, they can trigger sympathetic overdrive, the body's fight or flight mode. This reduces melatonin, disturbs circadian rhythms, and leads to restless sleep, morning fatigue, and low decision-making clarity. Feng Shui sees this as the bedroom losing its grounding qi. The energy for renewal, rest, and retention, especially for wealth and emotional stability, gets scattered by motion that lacks intention. Mark finally climbed up and checked the switch. The fan had been spinning clockwise downward throughout summer, which, in Feng Shui, pushes energy onto the body instead of lifting it gently upward. He flipped the switch, reset the speed to low, let it circulate with the season instead of against it. The next few nights were quiet, still not perfect, but deeper, more rooted. The noise inside his head dimmed, his dreams came back, and the feeling of coming back to himself returned. Later that week, a new business inquiry landed, an unexpected one, but it felt different. Stable, long-term. That's when it clicked. The energy hadn't just shifted. It had finally been allowed to land. The air felt supportive, like the room was giving back instead of spinning things out. Mark now calls it the fan fortune fix. And whenever someone mentions weird sleep or money slipping away, he just leans in and says, "Flip your fan, friend. You might be spiraling your wealth right out the door." Nothing says bad luck like reverse airflow and a full inbox of overdue invoices. Where energy spins with no direction, wealth doesn't stay, it searches for quieter ground. Some homes don't feel heavy, they feel still. But stillness in Feng Shui isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just energy that got stuck between two blocked paths. It started with a chair. A large leather armchair Mark had moved 6 months ago, angled just right to face the television. It wasn't in the way. It looked fine. But after the ceiling fan adjustment, after the vent clearings, Mark started noticing a strange pause again. Not tension, not swirl, just pause. The living room felt like it was holding something back. Air entered from the hallway window, but it never made it across the room. And in that dead air, things began to feel oddly delayed again. Emails weren't returning. His ideas slowed. His cash flow felt like it hit another invisible speed bump. Everything was moving, just not forward. And one afternoon, standing in the middle of the living room, Mark saw it. The chair was blocking the natural cross breeze between window and back patio door. One airflow line, completely stopped. In Feng Shui, energy loves to travel in curves and spirals, but it still needs a start and an end. An inlet, a route, a destination. When one side of that path is blocked, qi collapses in on itself. It can't escape. It can't circulate. And without circulation, you don't get renewal. Mark had restored movement, but the direction of energy was still interrupted. The chair planted right in the middle of the room acted like a plug in a pipe. The house didn't feel bad, just frozen, like the air couldn't decide where to go. In Feng Shui, this kind of block doesn't just mess with how things feel. It messes with what gets completed. Projects stall. Clients drift. Money doesn't land. And you can't trace the why. Mark was already paying attention to energy now. He'd seen what small shifts could do. But this one threw him off, because he hadn't added clutter. He hadn't created mess. He just made a small convenience move. That's what stung. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't ignorance. It was one everyday decision, blocking the natural flow because it made television watching easier. And the result? That strange, almost feeling again. Like life was circling, but not landing. When you block where energy exits, you block where money settles. He felt slightly foggy again, less motivated, not sad, just slowed, like life was buffering. Picture a warm summer room with a window open on one side and a screen door open on the other. You wait for the breeze, but it never comes because someone placed a dresser right between the two. That's what this chair had become, a quiet wall. And like many walls, it didn't look like the problem. It didn't scream. It didn't clutter. It just quietly disrupted the loop. And the thing with loops is, when they break, so does momentum. In work, in decisions, in wealth. Studies in air movement show that cross-ventilation is one of the most effective ways to renew indoor air and psychological clarity. When airflow is blocked between two openings, it leads to microclimate stagnation, a subtle buildup of heat, Colorado doise, and energetic discomfort. In Feng Shui terms, this equals blocked opportunity. Even if energy enters a space, it cannot distribute, and therefore cannot nourish the areas tied to clarity, prosperity, or rest. Mark wasn't just feeling slow. His space had stopped talking back. And without that exchange, everything stayed flat. He moved the chair just 2 feet, angled it slightly instead of dead center. Within minutes, air moved differently. He could feel it, subtle but certain. The room felt whole again, connected. Later that day, a delayed deal moved forward. A vendor confirmed a shipment Mark had given up on. His body felt lighter. He worked through the afternoon without dragging. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like an opening, the kind that doesn't cheer, but clears. The room felt balanced again, not excited, just right, like things were finally talking to each other. Mark now calls it the chair that blocked the blessing. And every time he rearranges the room, he checks the airflow first before the angle of the screen. All it took to reroute my cash flow was a chair, and apparently a little Feng Shui guilt. Feng Shui doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for direction. Because when energy doesn't know where to go, neither will your money. Some homes don't feel heavy, they feel still. But stillness in Feng Shui isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just energy that got stuck between two blocked paths. It started with a chair. A large leather armchair Mark had moved 6 months ago, angled just right to face the television. It wasn't in the way. It looked fine. But after the ceiling fan adjustment, after the vent clearings, Mark started noticing a strange pause again. Not tension, not swirl, just pause. The living room felt like it was holding something back. Air entered from the hallway window, but it never made it across the room. And in that dead air, things began to feel oddly delayed again. Emails weren't returning. His ideas slowed. His cash flow felt like it hit another invisible speed bump. Everything was moving, just not forward. And one afternoon, standing in the middle of the living room, Mark saw it. The chair was blocking the natural cross breeze between window and back patio door. One airflow line, completely stopped. In Feng Shui, energy loves to travel in curves and spirals, but it still needs a start and an end, an inlet, a route. a destination. When one side of that path is blocked, chi collapses in on itself. It can't escape. It can't circulate. And without circulation, you don't get renewal. Mark had restored movement, but the direction of energy was still interrupted. The chair planted right in the middle of the room acted like a plug in a pipe. The house didn't feel bad, just frozen, like the air couldn't decide where to go. In Feng Shui, this kind of block doesn't just mess with how things feel. It messes with what gets completed. Projects stall, clients drift, money doesn't land, and you can't trace the why. Mark was already paying attention to energy now. He'd seen what small shifts could do, but this one threw him off because he hadn't added clutter. He hadn't created mess. He just made a small convenience move. That's what stung. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't ignorance. It was one everyday decision, blocking the natural flow because it made television watching easier. And the result? That strange, almost feeling again. Like life was circling, but not landing. When you block where energy exits, you block where money settles. He felt slightly foggy again, less motivated, not sad, just slowed, like life was buffering. Imagine a highway system where every exit has a gate. Cars can enter, but none can keep going. The traffic piles up, and eventually people stop using the road. That's what a house becomes when doors stay shut all the time. Not a home, but a gridlock of intentions, where energy enters, but gets trapped. And trapped energy leads to trapped finances, trapped clarity, trapped timing. Mark wasn't doing anything wrong. He just didn't realize the home he thought he was organizing. He was actually sealing off. Architectural psychology studies show that interior openness within homes contributes to greater mental flexibility, faster decision-making, and emotional regulation. Spaces that block internal circulation of light and air are linked to lower serotonin levels and increased cortisol. Feng Shui calls this internal chi cutoff, where a home no longer collaborates with itself. Rooms become energetically isolated, and with it, so do your ideas, intentions, and yes, your money. Mark started small. He opened the office door one morning, left it that way during breakfast, then the guest room. By the end of the week, all 3 doors stayed open during the day. Within that week, a new client signed on someone he hadn't expected. He got paid early on a freelance invoice. And perhaps most importantly, he found himself feeling clearer in conversations, less scrambled, more together. It wasn't a magic trick. It was energy finally, in unity. Not perfect, not dazzling, but connected. The house started feeling like one body instead of separate rooms. Now, every morning, Mark walks down that hallway and smiles when the light passes through all 3 doorways. It doesn't make him richer on the spot, but it reminds him that money-like energy needs room to travel. I used to shut every door to feel in control. Turns out I was just Feng, shoring myself into an energetic traffic jam. Feng Shui doesn't just flow through space. It flows through openness. Because wealth isn't built on silence. It's built on connection. Some homes don't need more furniture, or more candles, or another deep clean. Sometimes they just need to breathe again. Not just through the windows, but through the vents, the doors, the air that loops from room to room, carrying every part of your energy, your focus, your time, your lucky flow, to the places that need it most. Mark didn't move to a new house. He didn't buy new crystals. He just listened to what the air was trying to say. And when he did, his home answered back. With clarity, with movement, with quiet forms of wealth that had been waiting to return. If any part of this felt like your story, we're glad you found your way here. We share 2 new videos every day to help you reconnect your space with the flow it's been asking for. If you'd like to walk that journey with us, feel free to like, subscribe, or just leave a comment so we know you're out there too. And until next time, let your energy move like air. Soft, steady, and never stuck.